So, the inverted pyramid of piffle has finally collapsed, leaving the Conservative Party underneath like rats in a sack, though that might be unfair to rats and sacks. But it's Friday night with Byline Times with me, Peter Jukes.
And me, Hardeep Matharu. And over the next hour, we're bringing you what the papers don't say.
And what the TV doesn't like to tell you. Well, another tumultuous week, a new Prime Minister in the office. What chaos, what embarrassment overseas, and what a crisis in democracy. Who better to explain that than Gina Miller, businesswoman and campaigner and founder of the True and Fair Party. She'll be joining us in the studio.
We'll also be talking to Gina about a key issue, which we think helps explain a lot of how we've ended up where we have, but which most of the mainstream media still doesn't want to talk about. You know what I am saying. It's the B word.
The B word.
B word, Brexit. We'll also be joined in the studio tonight by our own Mike Galsworthy, the founder of the Bylines Network and scientist for EU. Now, Mike is launching a brand new feature-length documentary with Byline TV, which will be the definitive expose, the truth behind Brexit.
And Mike will be having some news about plans to turn this documentary into a Hollywood blockbuster. But underneath it all, there are 2,000 EU laws which are currently going through scrutiny in Parliament. And Mike spoke to the Labour MP, Stella Creasy, about the retained EU law bill and what's going on there.
And what about the media and its complicity in our current crisis? It's an issue that we always like to explore here on Byline TV. So tonight we'll be joined in the studio by Reid of The Telegraph to ask her what she makes of it all. And
unlike other media, we don't have any donors, hedge funds, dark think tanks funding us, as we always said. And sorry to be boring about it, we are funded by you. And if you want to support us, the way you can do that is heading over to byline.tv/join. And therefore, there you can become a Byline TV Plus member with all the benefits, all the documentaries, all the hidden content that only members can see. And tonight, especially, what you get to do tonight, Hardeep?
Well, you get to join us for our After Dark Q&A, which takes place every week after this live show ends. And tonight, Peter and myself will be joined by all of our guests in the main show. So if you have a question for any of them, do sign up tonight and you can join us for After Dark.
And that'll be fantastic. Meanwhile, we had 2 broadcasts yesterday, 2 podcasts, 2-hour broadcasts. If we stumble over our words, forgive us, because it's been another one of those weeks. And we've done a digital front page. And this is our digital front page, the end of the road. Yes, you know what we're talking about. Truss, the catastrophe. There's a really interesting analysis by Ahmed about, is this a more systemic collapse? We have a nice little piece from our producer, George, sat over there, about the second coming of Boris Johnson. Yes, who's clicked is going to show you his piece, not anybody else's. And lots of other content, as we usually do. But we haven't got much time to talk about it. Go over there, bylinetimes.com. And if you can, support the newspaper, which funds a lot of the stuff we do. And it's a great monthly newspaper edited by Hardeep. So, what happened this week? Did anything happen this week, Hardeep?
I don't know. It's hard
hard
to recall, really, isn't it?
You might have remembered we briefly had a Prime Minister called Liz Truss. Well, before Gina Miller joins us in the studio to talk about the serious implications of all of this, let's just take a look at the decay of that lettuce. The final passing speech of Prime Minister, the shortest Prime Minister in living history, Liz Truss, earlier this week.
I came into office at a time of great economic and international instability. Families and businesses were worried about how to pay their bills. Putin's illegal war in Ukraine threatens the security of our whole continent. And our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this. We delivered on energy bills and on cutting national insurance. And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party. This morning I met the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week. This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
Well, where do we even start with analysing all of this chaos? Well, I think Gina Miller's a good person to ask. She's here with us now. Hi, Gina. Thanks for coming. What do you make of the past 48 hours? What's happened?
There's so many emotions I think we're going through as a country. Depression, exasperation, disbelief. I mean, the full gamut. And I'm no different, feeling all of those. And I keep thinking I'm living in an alternative universe because the UK used to be respected around the world as having stable politics, stiff upper lip. You know, we got on with things, we were common sense, we had a stable democracy, we had a mother of all parliaments, everyone respected. People relied on us for our soft power and our common sense, and it's all gone through failed fantasists who basically lash out everywhere because everything they're trying is ideological. There's not grounded in any reality, and everybody else is paying that price.
And the fact that what people abroad were taking from this was the lettist one. I mean, you're right in terms of looking at Britain's reputation being shredded.
I actually got a text from somebody who, what I consider a really close friend, somebody very senior abroad, who said, Gina, the UK is now officially an emotional basket case. And you're thinking, this is how diplomats, this is how people who are in senior positions are looking at us. And what's changed actually over the summer to now is that people were laughing and look, they're actually deeply worried because the ripple effects of what we're doing here, economically, socially, politically, geopolitically, security-wise, is now serious. So there is a worry that if we can't get our house in order, we can't bring stability, that it will affect other countries.
This is exactly what I had two friends, one in Poland, one in Netherlands, actually contacting me worried. And so it's not just an emotional thing. We spoke on the podcast yesterday to the former diplomat Alexander Hall, who said when Brexit happened, she tried to reassure Americans, or Americans thought, well, the British must know what they're doing. And now they know we don't. But it's also economic contagion, isn't it? Because we're the fifth or sixth, depending on whether you measure it, largest economy in the world. If our pension funds collapse, it's like, Lehman and Lehman Brothers, and
it is. The contagion effect is significant because of the way gilts work, the way borrowing works, look at the figures today. The OBR was expecting that our figures for September would be 14 billion borrowing. It's actually been 20. The effect is significant, but from us domestically, it will hurt us with inward investment because it's not just about stability and confidence, it's also about credibility, and it's much more difficult to get back credibility, and we've trashed it, or the Conservatives, not we. The Conservatives have trashed it because they're desperate, and I think that's the thing that you can feel, is you can smell their desperation, and that's what's really damaging our country.
Sorry.
What do you think is the way out of this now? I mean, people are saying Boris Johnson's going to be coming back to lead us out of it.
The question I'd like to ask, first of all, is why was he on holiday? You know, the Parliament sat last week. He is an MP. He might not be Prime Minister, but he's actually the MP. Why was he on holiday? That actually contravenes the thing we pay him for, or as taxpayers, to be in Parliament. So, you know, I'll just put that out there. But if Boris Johnson comes back, then I think it will be another nail in the coffin for the fact that we have undone our standing in the world for decades. I mean, it would take us to another level of absurdity. I mean, words almost fail me, but it just shows you how totally unfit for government the Tory party is, because they have no respect, no care for this country or the people of this country. We should be talking now about the fact that we've got millions of people who can't afford to eat. You've got children, you know, look at the UN report on poverty, that we've got a third of our children living in poverty. These are serious consequences for our country while they're playing politics.
And if you see the ERG, they're talking about they want their ministers in place, these well-paid positions. And Boris Johnson could be out in November if the Privileges Committee finds he's lied.
It's all nonsense. They're playing with our lives. They're playing with people. They're playing with politics. And it's immoral and it's unforgivable. And they should not be doing this. But I can't see whoever becomes the leader that they can actually bring this party together. Because I think at the same time, they're the best advert for proportional representation. Because that party is not one party. I mean, it's obvious that the Conservative Party is not one party. It should be split into 2 or 3 parties, and then people can vote for them.
Can I just make a point? It's on our front page of our paper. Josiah Mortimer was looking at the security of the voting system for the members, because I thought it was just in Parliament. Now they're building a system, and in a week, it's going to go to the vote to the members, who are the 2 candidates, to choose the final one. Anybody, as tortoise, are now taking a judicial review against the Conservative Party. Anybody from anywhere with a fake name can vote for our next Prime Minister. So that's another democratic deficit.
The democratic deficit about what they're doing is so bad. It's damaging every part of our democracy. People already did not have trust in politicians. I mean, trust has been in the gutter for years, and they've made it worse over the last 6-8 months. But now it's a whole different depth. And this is why I don't understand how they think they can go to the polls next year, 2 years, whenever it is. Because surely what they want to do, if they're going to be completely selfish, is to win an election. Who is ever going to vote for this Tory government after this charade? It's just shocking to me that they think that this is the way they can con people.
Well, talking about cons, I mean, something we've been discussing quite a lot on Byline TV this week with all the chaos is how much all of this goes back to Brexit and how that fundamentally changed the political climate, it changed the Conservative Party, it has increasingly radicalised what was once a fairly mainstream party. I mean, how do we get out of this now? Because the B word, no one wants to mention it. Not the mainstream media, definitely not the Conservative Party, not really the Labour Party.
No, Brexit is the elephant in the room. I mean, it's a lot of this goes back to that. And actually, Brexit, the issues around Brexit actually go back to the global financial crisis. So you can actually go back there, and the fact that people are hurting, and we didn't actually listen to people improve their lives. So it's long in the coming, but Brexit was a footnote, if you like, in the importance of what happens next. But it's an important footnote, and I think until we accept 3 things, one is Brexit is not over. Because what Boris Johnson did is he put together a paper which made it look as though he had an oven-ready deal. It wasn't even, as people have said, not even the light wasn't even on in the oven. You know, it's full of red flags in it, and those are going to come to fruition because COVID interrupted the true nature of the damage that Brexit will do. Also, the second thing is, if they were going to win, and I got involved in October 2015, and I can tell you from every green room, every panel I was on, the Brexiteers and the people I kept asking, what's your plan? They actually never thought they were going to win, so there was no plan. They absolutely 100%, everyone I can tell you I spoke to did not think they were going to win. So they didn't have a plan. So when they eventually got into power, they tried to bring in their fantasy ideology into the plan, and it wasn't a real plan because it was fantasy. You know, you can't diverge when the rest of the world is converging. You can't expect to close down borders when people are realizing that we've got mass movement of people, we've got environmental challenges without borders. I mean, everything they have put forward is going to fail because it's not being developed in a real world scenario. It's being developed in an ideological scenario. And the third thing on Brexit, I'd say, is that don't be fooled that those cultish Brexiteers will sacrifice anything on the altar of Brexit, and they do not care about the rest of us. And so whatever happens to business, science, technology, security, not even thinking like us.
You know the world of the city, and is it not true that obviously that mini budget by Kwasi Kwarteng, the irreconcilable tax cuts, which just wouldn't balance the books. But underlying that, when the pound goes down, usually how we get out of that situation is cheap exports. Our exports are flatlined, haven't they, since Brexit? Meanwhile, productivity and inward investment, that's achieved by exchanges of skills, freedom of movement. So we cannot grow the economy without dealing with a less hard Brexit.
The mini budget was showed not just fiscal ignorance, it showed political ignorance and misjudgment too, because there was actually no political reason for them to say the things they did. They could have just dealt with the energy crisis and then thought about it later. But it just shows you how ideological and cultish they are. But the markets matter. The IMF matters. The World Trade Organizations matter. The Moody's matters. You know, the downgrading of the credibility of the UK matters. We have no fiscal credibility now. And the damage they've done, even if they repaired it in the short term and the pound goes up, which might go to parity, and yes, there are global issues that means we can't just resolve these issues on interest rate and inflation straight away, and because of the war in Ukraine. But the fact is that the damage has been done, the ripple effect to the mortgage market, to the cost of living crisis, to small businesses. They have destroyed people's lives already. However, they get it back, and to whatever degree they can roll back their mistakes, they have already ruined millions of people's lives. And there are people who will not survive. And so they have, as far as I'm concerned, they have blood on their hands in that budget.
Wow.
So let's look ahead to what could happen. I mean, it seems anecdotally, many people are saying we need a general election, not the third prime minister in however many months. Let's look forward to that general election then, Gina. What do you think the opposition parties need to do? And your party, True and Fair, what's your game plan, if you like?
We are almost not focused on right and left, but right and wrong. And I come back to, we are so broken as a society. Look at what's fundamentally wrong. And to me and our party, what's fundamentally wrong is the machinery of government. We need to clean up politics. We need to modernize politics, and we need to fight corruption. So our constitution needs reforming. We need a truth law for MPs. We need to close all the tax loopholes, evasion, avoidance, whatever you call it. You know, we need to discourage the way the Parliament works. I mean, look at the bullying of the whips the other night. That was a disgrace. Look at the lobbying that's going on. Look at the tomography, what happened in COVID, what happened to all the awarding. You know, the figures on Monday when we publish our first tranche of candidates, our first 10 candidates, we're also doing a white paper on closing the tax loopholes, and it's phenomenal how much money is wasted in our country. And the other thing is procurement. There are things we need to do to bring governance to government, and that's what we're concentrating on. And because we believe that will encourage, if you want good politics, you need good people, not professional politicians. You need checks and balances, and you need value for money, and you need to build trust. If you can't do those things, our system won't be reformed.
Are you targeting, particular seats or?
Absolutely. So we've looked very carefully at the seats, because I think for this Tory government's gone so far, we need to work together and not all target the same seats. But the anti-Tory coalition needs to create a landslide defeat of the Tory government. Then they can go off and resolve their party and rebuild their party, 97, decide what they're going to do. But to achieve a landslide defeat, we need to concentrate on the seats we can win. So we have been very careful in the seats that we're going to fight, and the seat I'm going to fight.
Yes, I was going to say, you'll be standing, Gina.
I am absolutely standing, not like some other party leaders who talked a big game and never stood.
And just finally, In the last 24 hours, Nigel Farage, like he always has at these moments, has popped up saying, well, now we need another party. We need to get going. I need some help. Who's going to join me?
Yeah, but you know, poor thing. His own party threw him out. There is one there called Reform, which is his old Brexit party. Interesting that they don't want him. I don't think he's got a party if he wants to go back to it. So
do you think there's a danger of any further to the right parties emerging?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think there are going to be. I mean, I think you'll end up with 2 or 3 parties. And it's very interesting, the mainstream media response I get and the party gets. True and fair, we're told all the time, we can't have you on as a challenger party because we'd have to have all the other challenger parties on. I keep asking them, who are they all? Because there's only 2 or 3 at the moment. But on a regular basis, if you looked at the Electoral Commission's website, there are parties registered all the time. And that's part of our democracy, and it's only right. To have somebody who's trusted, somebody who's known, to build the credence with the public, to get the financing, it's not easy to execute rolling out a party. It's not easy to do. The funding model needs to be changed in the UK. The media oxygen needs to change, well, the way you get coverage in media. There are lots of things that mean that there are barriers to smaller parties. I'm very, very aware of that.
It's a good thing you're launching on Monday because we may have general elections sooner than we know.
I think you absolutely will have it. I mean, I think the dysfunctional and the chaos in this Conservative Party will carry on. They're not one party, so therefore they can't be one government.
Well, we're keeping abreast of that. And obviously, we did talk about Brexit and its role as some kind of foundational lie which has escalated in its economic damage. Well, you might have seen earlier this week that Byline's network founder, Mike Galsworthy, has started a movie with Byline TV. Yes, as a crowdfunder, it's called Brexit, the documentary. And tonight, exclusive tonight, we have some news about that because it's amazingly raised £55,000 for 50 minutes in 2.5 days. And we think we should make it a Hollywood blockbuster.
This morning I woke up absolutely blown away. We have smashed through the 50k fundraising mark that we had for our TV documentary on Brexit. And it was 1,700 people that have donated, and the support has kept coming in and the comments have kept coming in. And in fact, alongside all of the funding and all of the supportive comments, there were so many people also saying, Mike, please don't forget this. Please don't forget that. So all of you have brought up issues that I had forgotten about as well. And so that's why today I went to the producers and I went to our team and said, I've got an idea. Can we make this bigger? Can we extend it from a 50-minute documentary to a full feature documentary, a full 90 minutes length film, so that we can include all the points that everyone's bringing up from across the community, because there is a lot. And they said we could. They said that, you know, if we can raise the funds for it, they've got the capacity and the time to do it. So we can go for a full 90 minutes. So to do that, and we've done the maths on it, we would need about £1,000 per extra minute. So for a full 90-minute documentary, that would be £90,000. But that means that we can make it bigger and better. We can get in more experts, we can do more research, more analysis, bring in more interviews, visit more locations, hire more locations, get more data into there and make it authoritative on absolutely every aspect of it. And that is a community documentary that we will build together. Thank you so much for what you've done so far. Let's keep going.
And now we're joined by Mike Galsworthy. Thanks for coming, Mike. So we're going to get on to the documentary, which is very exciting for all of us. Mm-hmm. But let's just quickly talk about the B word and how a lot of what we're seeing now started there. What is your take on that as someone who has seen the implications of this in real time?
Yes, and more people are saying that, actually. The Financial Times just did a mini-film, 30-minute mini-film, on the Trussonomics budget, Kwasi Kwarteng's Kwamikaze, wasn't it, budget, and how that links originally back to Brexit and how it's been driven by the same philosophy all the way through. And there are more and more actually articles in the mainstream media now that are coming out that are all saying the same thing, that this all, our current chaos and current disaster dates back to trying to build policy around a fantasy. You've got an engine here that's the engine of government, and people are trying to make it work by pulling on fantasy levers that don't exist. And so that is really starting to come a cropper.
Not just economically, the fact we need growth because we're in such a bad position, not just ideologically, but also how the climate of politics and how it's
lies have been rewarded,
changed,
haven't they?
right?
Basically, you double down.
Yeah, sure. And that's something that Boris Johnson was very much the ringmaster of. And Truss, as his young student, tried to copy. And now the ringmaster seems to be making a return. And I can't tell you how I feel about that in normal English language. But it has...
Certainly, we're not post-watershed, so you have to keep your language down.
I'd rather keep it refined and just say that, you know, it's sad how corrosive it is of our country and our country's reputation, with not just lettuce, you know, jokes, but also so much commentary from around the world now, from Europe and from the States.
I think we've gone completely mad.
They have. And
We used to be this boring nation of shopkeepers.
It's highly entertaining to them. No, basically, look, our comedy used to come from our actual comedians. And it used to come from, you know, our musicians being flamboyant and, you know, all manner of arts that we put out. And now it's our politicians being the comedians, and our actual arts and comedy is like limited and shut down, and we can't protest and we can't export things. We don't have free movement. So it's all gone topsy-turvy. It's not the right way round, and it can't last much longer in this current model.
So this is the great time, isn't it, for Brexit the documentary. You can go to brexitdocumentary.com to find out more. And you see a brilliant trail on the white cliffs of Dover, Mike's hair blowing in the breeze. It's very Heathcliff-like and very romantic, but also, as Mike's a great scientist, very factual. So tell us some news. So amazingly, you know, what happens with crowdfunders is people contribute, but if you go to the actual site, George, if you go to Donor Box, then they go, brilliant, brilliant. Can you cover this? So that's what really inspired. It wasn't just that you raised 50,000 quite quickly, but it's you realised you had more to cover.
Yeah, so this, I mean, the production team at Byline TV said, you know, we think we want to do, you know, this topic. Would you present it? And I said, well, yes, absolutely. I mean, this is something that I and probably many other people have fantasized about, but never really thought that we'd have the juice or capacity to go and do it. And so this all came together very rapidly, very recently. We said, right, let's go and do a promo video on the cliffs of Dover, make it, you know, very dramatic and all the rest, and hopefully, you know, our audience would back it. I've got a sense that they would. And within 2.5 days, we just smashed what we were asking for. And I was delighted. But then, and I said this in the update video, lots of people, and these, oftentimes these are people that I've known for years who've been dead frustrated for years and years, were saying, Mike, please don't forget about us European citizens in the UK. Mike, please don't forget. Yes, and Mike, please don't forget about us, you know, Brits in the EU. They've got these bizarre bureaucracies to deal with. We can't visit our families, we can't bring them out. And then there are other people who are saying, well, you know, this is Bylines. We want to see the stuff on Russian interference. We want to see Cambridge Analytica. We want to see, you know, the validity of the referendum. And I just thought, right,
is epic.
Well, you say epic. My heart also sinks because I'm thinking, you know, this community of people, like all of you watching now, rely on us to do what the BBC won't do and tell all these stories. And this isn't going to fit in 50 minutes. It's just not. So then I talked to Kaylin and George and Stephen and said, right, well, you know...
Hollywood movie time.
Well, yeah, basically, yes.
90 minutes.
50 minutes isn't going to be able to cover everything. 90 minutes is the proper feature film length. It's the full documentary. And then we can do everything justice as well.
Give you lots of time to grow your hair even longer, Mike. You can walk along and have it all.
We're gonna have to move fast on this. This is going to be.
It's not going to grow.
It's going to be extremely disruptive. My hair's going to whiten.
It very much is building, isn't it, on all the work that Byline TV has done.
Yeah, because we've got these massive archives here.
The archives.
So just so people who haven't always watched, Kanan and George have been filming fishermen, oystermen, from turkey farmers,
lorry
road hauliers,
drivers.
everybody from the beginning of the hard Brexit in 2020. And what has happened, isn't it, is that COVID hid the consequences of us fully leaving the EU with the withdrawal agreement in early 2020. And it's now taken 2 years and a bit for it to show. And so there's an urgency about this, isn't there? Yeah. We need to get this out by early next year, by Christmas if possible. And you are going to get white hair, and it's not going to grow very much. And so, what we urge people.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a grind, but it's also going to be fun, and it's going to be very fulfilling. It's just going to be one of those moments, and I think it's important to say this here, which is, this was backed by this community watching this and following us. 1,700 people in just 2.5 days.
And they get their names in the credits.
Yeah, no, and if you contribute, you get your names in the credits. There are other, benefits to being part of this. But also what we've just said now is that because so many of you pointed out things that I'd forgotten about during the whole Brexit saga, we want to make sure that we don't miss anything. And we're asking people to send us in reminders about, esoterica that we certainly should be covering as well, whether it's a particular graph or link to an article.
Or exporting a bicycle. I remember this guy suddenly, he was a bicycle manufacturer. And he relocated to Holland because the cost of each part, the duties, it just became ridiculous to stay here.
Yeah. So there are so many. Anyway, to actually, if you're interested in telling us what you want covered or think we're going to miss something, then brexit.@byline.tv, we're going to be going out and asking all of our network, tell us what otherwise we would miss. Just, we don't want to put this thing out, then have things missed, and then have our audience say back to us, oh, if only you'd covered this or that. We want to know all up front and make sure that we get everything woven in, that we can realistically within 1.5 hours.
So like Byline TV itself has 1,500 members now, and all our followers on YouTube. I mean, crowdfunding is one way of making this work without an oligarch, but it's also amazing, we found this on the paper as well, engagement. You tell us the stories you want us to cover. So we'll have regular updates on this. We'll find a way of communicating to you and you to us. You can always write to info@byline.tv. That's a good email address. If you've got an idea and a story you want to tell, follow us on Twitter, or maybe we should get our own Twitter handle. But meanwhile, it sounds like we're pitching, we're not. We're trying to build a project together with you. There's some very serious issues underlying all this. And one is what happens to all those 2,000 EU laws which we now are abandoning. Who's running them now? What's going to happen to all those bits of legislation? Well, earlier, Mike talked to the Labour MP, Stella Creasy, about what's going on with the retained EU law bill in Parliament.
So what is this bill?
Yeah,
and what are its origins?
I would argue that right now, with all the chaos that we're seeing, it's a bit like we've got this burning building and somebody's about to run into it with a whole bag of Semtex, because this piece of legislation deletes at a stroke thousands of pieces of law next year, and then sets out a process by which ministers, not Parliament, can decide whether or not to keep those pieces of legislation, to replace them, or just continue to abolish them. And it's been something that the government has tried to talk about for years. It's actually called the EU Retained Law Bill, because it's about the pieces of law that were part of being part of the European Union, and now we've left the European Union, we have to decide how they're on the British statute book. And when we first left the European Union, we just copied everything over. This hits delete and goes from there.
And it hits delete on the lot, isn't it? And they've been bragging about it as well. We're going to clean it off in all this high-sounding language.
Because they're more concerned about the fact that the law rested in Europe than what the law did. But I think most people would recognise maybe we should understand what those laws did before we decide that just deleting them is a good thing.
And maybe we were supportive of these laws, and maybe these are exactly the laws that we would do as a European country, like the other 27 European countries, that shows that these aspects are important.
Let me give you some examples of the sorts of laws we're talking about. Like the law's about airline safety, as in what makes a plane safe to sit on.
Oh, delete that.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't possibly make sense for us to have common laws, would it? Because it's not like a plane goes from different countries and between them, so that it doesn't matter that a plane is equally safe when it lands in, say, Italy as landing in the UK. Maternity rights. Anybody think the maternity rights
If our laws were lesser in the UK, then you could see why other countries wouldn't want those planes flying into their countries if they hadn't been serviced in the right way, for example.
Well, they cover all the things about whether a plane is serviced, like whether it should be up in the air, basically. Maternity rights, part-time workers directive, but also laws on your rights to compensation if your luggage is lost, if your flight is delayed, laws around your entitlement to your pension. If your company goes bust, at the moment you have a requirement to at least 50% of your pension pot. That's on this list that's up for grabs as well.
And that's a big one, because you would have thought if you're going to have any changes in that, you'd want this going through Parliament, through proper primary legislation that can be fully debated, right?
Well, I think for a lot of people, they've paid into their pension pots. We know right now there's a lot of concern about pensions because of the economic crisis that we're in. People want to know what they've got for their retirement. It's not an unfair question.
And this government's just going to
they're going to
hit delete on it.
They're going to hit delete on all of it.
On all the guarantees. Also, next year, it's gone.
Also, rules on insider trading. All of that.
Ooh, yes.
Again, based on European legislation. Illegal firearms laws. Again, I mean, obviously something that only we can write.
Yes. And the RSPB and the National Trust have also been up in arms about some of the protections that could be deleted at a stroke as well.
Yeah. So with this list of Jacob Rees-Mogg's kind of list of everything that he's put up, there is both. He created a dashboard of all these laws. There's both direct laws, like some of the ones I've just talked about, and then there are provisions like around sites of special interest that also have a knock-on effect on things around planning and environmental protection. So suddenly rip up laws around water quality, again, that have massive knock-on impacts on laws that we have in the UK. See, what always happens with Europe is Europe might set a standard. We might then write our own standards and our own laws and how we apply them, but the original standard was the basis for the legal protection.
So the directives, where the European Union says, we all agree, right, that we're going to hit these targets, and you can do your own laws in order to get to it in your own ways. And then, so scrapping that.
So it's like all these different laws that people have depended on and understood. Now, some of them people might not think are a good idea, but the point is they were all there interconnected together, and removing them in one fell stroke is one thing. Then giving only ministers the primary power to decide what happens next is the second thing.
So this is the second part. So the first part, as you were saying before, is just the whole span of things that this covers. Decades of working with our whole neighbourhood in writing laws and protections that we all agree to that have set standards and set a fabric. One is deleting that in one fell swoop, with pretty much very few people noticing or talking about it. But then, as you were saying just now, part two is, once you clear them out, what do you replace them with? What's the process by which you replace them? Is it democratic?
Well, and also I should say, like, one of the reasons these laws really matter is because they give people a sense of certainty. So one of the reasons a lot of business groups are really concerned about this is it causes all sorts of chaos. Actually, regulation is really pro-competition because it basically stops bad apples from undercutting everybody else and sets a level playing field. So as soon as you rip all those up, you create all this chaos. So of course everyone's saying, okay, well, we've left the European Union. We now need to make sure we've got UK laws that cover these issues. You don't want to rely on European laws anymore. But if you remove all of them, what are you going to replace them with? The government has created a double process whereby, as I say, it depends on what ministers think. And crucially, they've written into this legislation a requirement that whatever replaces them can only be worse than what we've got. So whether you voted to leave or remain, we were all told, well, one of the things that could happen if we left the European Union is we could set higher standards. We weren't beholden to what Europe is doing. Europe was holding us back. This bill writes into law a requirement for the reverse. It says things can only be a race to the bottom because it talks about burdens. So it says that whatever replaces it, if a minister chooses to replace it at all, has to be of a lower standard than the thing that we currently have. So on environmental protections, and I think actually across politics, people are really concerned about the environment, really concerned to protect, this green and pleasant land. we can only
and
reduce
our beaches
those
and our
lines.
rivers and our air, please.
Yeah, we can only, under this legislation, reduce those protections.
Because making it cleaner would mean that there are more regulations, and that's going to be forbidden effectively.
That's what it would call a burden.
You see, this for me was one of the really frustrating things in the whole Brexit argument. You know, when Michael Gove was saying, oh no, it will mean that we can have higher standards. It's like, well, for a start, that's rubbish, because by having this network of standards, that lifts up all boats on the same tide. And if you want to go higher, you know, good for you, and you've got a voice to help pull up other countries too. That's the direction of travel. But as soon as you step off the platform, then you also have a downward direction. And what you're saying now is they're actually putting a cap, yes, taking us off the rising platform and putting a cap and saying you can now only go down, even if you want cleaner rivers and cleaner air and better checks. If they get in the way with new red tape, as we're going to call it, then you can't do that.
Pollution isn't a great fan of borders.
Yeah.
One of the reasons you work with other countries is to make sure that you are working together so that one doesn't affect the other.
Yep.
This bill writes into law that we cannot improve our standards without affecting what is called a burden. And I actually think, I think that's why people like Michael Gove are concerned about this legislation. And that shows us why it's so important, you know, whether you voted Leave or Remain. One of the things I always say to people is don't lose the next war because you're too busy fighting the last one.
Yep.
We have got to be incredibly vigilant about what this does and refuse to accept this is anything to do with whether you want to leave the European Union or not.
Yeah, or too busy defending your position from the last one.
Yeah.
You know, you can always get, or too busy being distracted by the current mess that is Liz Truss and Boris Johnson saying is going to come back and all that kind of stuff.
Well, we desperately need growth in our economy right now. We've got a massive black hole, and that means we've got to be better at trade. We've got to be better at giving businesses certainty and confidence to invest. This will not do this. In fact, if anything, this is the reverse, because suddenly all those basic rules, as I say, TUPE rules about transferring people, they're up for grabs as well. Basic employment rights. And actually, good employers want certainty so they can get on with doing brilliant products and brilliant services rather than worrying about what their competitors are doing.
So the government is just telling the country and the business framework of the country that essentially we're going to be pulling a huge rug away, absolutely chock-a-block with laws that may impact you, but we're not going to give you the authoritative list now in any comprehensible way because we don't want people making a fuss about it.
Actually, it's worse than that. Jacob Rees-Mogg put up his dashboard and said, you tell me what you want to keep. So he put the pressure on everyone else to work out what he was trying to do and whether it was a good idea. Because this legislation has this sunset clause in, so basically it hits delete, everything goes, and it is dependent on a minister, A, knowing it's going, and remember there are thousands of these laws, 800 of which have no ministerial responsibility. Now, do you want to take a wager on whether those 800 are any good?
And who's going to take those on as the time bomb is
ticking on? And there is no,
them?
critically for us as Democrats, there is no challenge if they choose just to let it fall.
Well, where does the media fit into all of this chaos? As regular viewers will know, Byline Times and Byline TV has a core function to look at what the established press are doing and whether it's always in the interests of our democracy. Well, now we're joined by a journalist who works for The Eye and The Telegraph, among others. Rebecca Reid is with us. Thank you for coming, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me.
What's your take on all of this? I mean, as I said, a lot of our work here focuses on sort of the structural aspects and failings of the more established media. Liz Truss, unlike Johnson, sort of divided the big influential newspapers. Mm-hmm. Not all of them backed her. Some of them backed Rishi Sunak. How do you think that all played out? And what do you make of them unceremoniously dumping her now?
I think the difficulty is that journalism has changed a great deal. Even so, I started working as a journalist in 2014, and even since then, it's changed because as a journalist, particularly digital journalist, you are accountable to your metrics. So you are assessed on the basis of how many clicks your writing gets. So where once it might have been about what you feel or what you've learned or what you've researched, it's now about how can I headline something that it doesn't look like clickbait, so it's not punished by the algorithm, but people want to read it. And so journalists are now led by the public mood about somebody much more than they ever were. Because if you write something mean about Liz Truss and the country is feeling anti-Liz Truss, it gets shared, you are doing better, you are therefore held in better esteem. Lots of newsrooms have leaderboards of how people's articles are performing, and that is a very hard way to do journalism with any form of integrity. It's one of the many reasons I like being freelance, because I'm not party to that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, what was really interesting during, the last leadership election that we've just seen in the Conservatives was a lot of the candidates mentioning things that were nowhere near on the priority list of the public. So things about gender
Toilets.
Yes.
or wokeness.
Who has a
or
vagina,
the
who has a
empire,
cervix.
history, black history being taught in schools. Not necessarily priorities for the public at all, not even contentious issues at large with the public.
Yeah.
Is there an ecosystem by which, because those stories create conflict and get clicks, they're being put out there, that's reinforcing the candidates and what they need to talk about?
And nothing gets coverage more than a moral panic. So if you convince people that millions of children are being castrated in the name of the transgender crusade, people will read about it because I have a child, I worry about her. If I think that's going to happen to her, I worry. And even though I am a sensible, educated person who's worked in the media, who knows when they're being manipulated, it's hard not to click that headline. So, and same thing, all of the dog whistling about identity culture and BLM and racism and statues being torn down, whether or not a statue is up or down, does not make a difference to any of our lives on an average day. It is a way of signalling, I am for this kind of person or I am for this kind of person. And at the moment, this kind of person, generally speaking, right-leaning, older, wealthier, has more power. Therefore, that is who all of the publications are targeting.
Do you sense that politicians themselves are manipulating this a clickbait ecosystem? I'm thinking back to former Home Secretary Suella Braverman's comments.
Oh, yes, wokerati tofu munching.
Everybody was tofu fighting.
I mean, the thing that I found unbearable about that is that it hasn't been tofu for like 20 years.
No.
We're so past tofu. We've been through matcha.
We've been through arugula. What about quinoa? How do you say it?
Quinoa.
Quinoa.
Quinoa was so 2015.
Oh, sorry.
The superfoods change every year. She needs to follow Poosh. She needs to follow Goop. She's got no idea what she's talking
What
about.
is that really contentious woke food now? I need to eat it.
I think jackfruit is a vegan meat replacement.
I've had it once. It smells horrible, jackfruit.
It's also very labour intensive to prepare.
Yeah.
So do we
we don't diverge.
Do we think that the media, again, now there's this whole frenzy about Boris Johnson returning, he may or may not be on a plane now, there are all these sort of updates on the Daily Mail's website, the Telegraph, the
Boris
Times,
tracker.
the
Boris tracker.
which no doubt will emerge. But, I mean, how much, then, is that going to influence Conservative MPs?
I think...
Or not at all?
The problem with politics is that it's populated by people who really, really want to have friends and be loved. And as somebody who has had that feeling, I went to all-girls school, I know what it is to try and make people like you, they are basically chasing whatever they think will go down well and be popular, which prevents you from being able to do your job properly. And there was an MP who gave, I can't remember who it was, but he gave an interview yesterday and he was like, I'm mortified, I'm fed up, this is going badly.
Walker, wasn't it?
It was, that's exactly it was. And I just thought, fair play to you, because you're actually trying to do your job. You're trying to get things done and act for the people who elected you, rather than constantly saying, ooh, if I slag off trans people or if I make a really mean point about BLM, then more people will like me.
Can I just ask you finally about the cultural newsroom? You've worked in this clickbait. Maybe not finally. Hardeep might have a follow-up questions. Not just this click-based, but the class-based culture. So, we know that journalism's very, it's difficult to get into. It's increasingly private school.
Yeah.
Because to live in London, you need to have somebody who has a house in London. And Harry Cole, dear Harry Cole, from Guido Fawkes now, head political editor of The Sun, tweeted out today, well, it's so great, even if Boris Johnson doesn't stand, just to see everybody annoyed and get the fury on Twitter. And we think about people starving, we think about people not being able to warm themselves. Is this like a public school bubble, where they're all ragging each other and they have fragging and all these things like that, that in a way that ethos, that it's all a big joke, it's trolling the audience, it's evoking emotion and outrage when people are hurting?
I think there's two things there. One of them is the sort of machinations of journalism. And in my experience, I am a very privileged person who is privately educated. I did self-support through, I didn't get money from my parents and I didn't live in London, but I still had the kind of education that told you what you have to say is important and you should be whatever you want to be. And that is the biggest privilege you can have. In my experience, most newsrooms are a two-tier system. At the top, you have fairly wealthy, usually former public school people, predominantly married to people outside of journalism earning much bigger salaries, allowing them to earn £60,000 a year, which is a good salary but doesn't buy you a house in Hampstead. And then doing the grunt work, which is what I found particularly in women's magazines, is a load of 19-year-olds making £16,500 a year who are living in, I knew people who lived in porter cabins, who shared bedrooms like as adults and living with parents. So that creates a very bad work environment, and it is a generalised problem around journalism. I think there is also a situation that the top tier of journalism hasn't moved in 10 years. It's predominantly people who know each other, who give each other favours, and that's very sort of stale. And also, you've got the left-right thing is worse than it's ever been. So you get new blood coming through some papers and absolutely no new blood coming through others. I'm lucky, everywhere I work really does foster diversity of voices, but there are a lot of places that really don't.
So they're like pillars. Do you do one last thought, Hardeep?
I was just wanting to come back to the very first comments you were making, Rebecca, about how journalism works these days, especially in the digital age, and how you balance that within yourself. I mean, what you've just described, I experienced as well in the mainstream media, and a huge part of why I'm sitting here today is I thought, I need to take myself out of that and help build a platform for myself and others where you do feel valued and all that sort of thing. But how does one stay in that system, be aware of its shortcomings and balance that in oneself?
Yeah, and also fundamentally, journalism, it shapes the conversations within the country, but it is also your job. And all of us, everybody who goes to work every day sometimes has an off day or is a bit hungover or isn't really feeling it. But unfortunately, you're being given a lot of power. And, I was a 24-year-old trying to get as much attention as possible because you got a £50 bonus if your story was shared a certain number of times. So I would write stories with titles like, "Don't you feel sorry for paedophiles?" or "All men should be put in camps." I didn't mean any of those things. I was just trying to get attention so that I could get paid. I think one of the things that really could do with changing is that media studies is very looked down on as a subject. It's one of those stupid person subjects. Actually, everybody in this country needs training in media studies. They need to understand how an article is written, why it's written, how they're being brainwashed, how they're being influenced, and how to resist that. As a journalist, I think all I try to do is not write stuff I don't believe for attention anymore, and try and be very sure of your sources, try and link back to things, try and have some integrity. But integrity is an expensive habit, and it's one I've only been able to afford since I've been in my late 20s, early 30s.
Rebecca, that's
brilliant.
brilliant.
So interesting. I'm still thinking about that point, integrity. Rebecca will be joining us on After Dark, along with Gina Miller and Mike Galsworthy. So if you want to put your questions to any of our guests, please do head over to byline.tv/join, and you can sign up as a member and put your questions to us in the After Dark.
And our After Dark section will begin in about 7 minutes. So do sign up and put your questions to Gina, Rebecca and Mike. All you have to do is byline.tv join. And for those of you who have signed up, we can be indiscreet, we can talk about things we can't say in public.
More tofu chat is coming up, everyone.
I could do my whole tofu fighting.
Yes.
We'll see you at 8, but if not...
Yes, thank you very much for joining us. We will be back. Who knows where we'll be next week? I mean metaphorically rather than physically, but who knows what could happen in a week. I guess there'll be a new Prime Minister this time next week. So we'll be back reporting on the new Conservative Prime Minister at 7 p.m. next Friday night with Byline Time. See you then.
Let us hope. What can a proper paper do? Well,
a year and a half before the Colston statue came down, Byline Times is exposing the continuing legacy of the British Empire. And in the time since, we've been chronicling the divisive battles in Boris Johnson's culture war. But more importantly than that, we've been providing our readers with the understanding and the tools to fight back.
2 years ago, Byline Times helped expose the reliance of Boris Johnson on hedge funds and city traders for his leadership campaign, and that was debated in Parliament. Since then, we've exposed the role of Russian oligarchs and helped release the Russia report.
We've investigated cronyism at the very heart of government, not least the £3 billion worth of COVID contracts awarded to Tory friends and donors. As a result of our work, several of the people involved in the decisions have now been removed from their positions.
In the wake of the Plymouth shooting, Byline Times exposed the inner workings of the incel movement so that people in the UK could understand the links between extremist misogyny, terrorism and the global war on women.
At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, Byline Times was the first paper to actually expose the herd immunity scandal. More recently, we've been looking at the corporate takeover of the NHS, the most blatant example of which is the government's attempt to sell RGP data. We broke this story many months ago, and as a result of breaking the story, more than 1 million people opted out from this scheme. That is the power of the paper.
That's the power of the paper.
That's the power of the paper.
That is the power of the paper.